Hello, and welcome back to episode 3 of the Astrology Demystified series. So this episode feels really exciting because we're pivoting back into the birth chart sector discussion, and I would love for you guys to actually have your birth charts with you, and it's just like easier to follow along and see how it translates for you and just have some kind of visual aid. We're going to be breaking down each one of the houses and what they mean, starting with the first house, which is the house of self. As we mentioned in the first episode, the birth chart goes a lot like how your life goes naturally, and you start out with you're born, and you have all these things about you, your physical appearance, your personality, it's your style, it's your disposition, it's kind of what people see when they first see you. It's also where the ascendant is stored. You don't have to have any planets in any of these houses for them to be activated, but if you do have planets in different houses, then there's more emphasis going on in that area of your life. And just to reiterate, houses are areas of your life. This house is traditionally associated with Aries. Each house has a sign that it's associated with. Doesn't mean that the sign rules the house. It's just as you understand the signs too, you kind of understand why they are in the houses that they are in. Aries is the first sign. Aries is very direct. It's first out of the gates, like the bull out of the gate, the first thing that you see. The second house is the second house. It's the house of what you acquire. How you value yourself is directly linked to your money. So this is a very important house. There's you and there's what you have. There's your sense of self, your sense of self-worth. It's also actually the house of possessions, the house of money, your money, your sense of worth is associated with money. If you haven't kind of discovered that through life by now, this is me and these are my possessions, they add on to me. The second house is traditionally associated with the second sign, which is, what is the second sign? Taurus. What comes after Aries? Taurus. And the third house is the house of communication. It is how you communicate, how you express yourself. I think it's also associated with writing. Some people who have hard placements in the third house, for example, can, have a hard time learning how to speak, or they could have spoken later in life. The third house is traditionally associated with Gemini. Gemini is all about communication. They're communicators, among other things. The fourth house is the house of home. It's associated with motherhood too, your childhood. The fourth house is most associated with the sign of Cancer, which you see how it links? Cancer, fourth house, it all makes sense. The fifth house is the house of creativity. It's the house of pleasure, sex. Children can be seen from there because it's what you produce. It's everything that comes from you, how you express yourself with your creativity. It is what you give birth to, in a sense. You come from home and then what you give birth to. You can kind of see actually what your firstborn is going to be. There's a high chance that my firstborn is going to be a male because I have Aries there, but that is not always completely accurate. Stay tuned when I have my firstborn. But so yeah, the fifth house is creativity, what you give birth to, what brings you joy. And it's most associated with Leo, because Leo is, the sign of children, creativity. It's where you kind of shine, what makes you happy. And the sixth house is the house of slavery. No, I'm just kidding. It's actually the house of your work life, every day-to-day stuff, little detailed things, mostly your work life, just your everyday life. You wake up, you brush your teeth, it's everyday mundane activities, and it is associated with the sign of Virgo. I'm telling you, all this stuff makes sense and it just connects. It's also the house of your health, so there's a certain consistency and discipline that goes with the 6th house, just because it's your work life, it's your health, all that good stuff. And the 7th house, everyone's favorite house, is the house of relationships. Your marriage can be seen with this house. It's also whereas the 1st house is the ascendant, the 7th house is the descendant. They're completely opposite from each other. So there's you, and there's how you see people. So the 7th house is also how we see other people. So if you have a certain sign, like whatever you have in your 1st house, whatever sign is in your 7th house can be how you see people. The 7th house is associated with Libra because, like I said, the 7th house is relationships that you have with other people. It's how your marriage life is going to be. Libra is the sign of relationships. It loves to build relationships. Moving on to the 8th house, I feel like it deals with a lot of things that happen in your life that are kind of unfortunate or like kind of a downer, like taxes, other people's money, death, occult stuff. The 8th house is associated with Scorpio. Leave Scorpio alone, but 8th house is considered to be a pretty dark house. Not that Scorpio is all doom and dark, but it's very deep, and coming from the 7th house, what happens after you get married or you form these relationships? You have things that happen after marriage, like in-laws and like taxes and all this stuff, like legalities after marriage. So you can see the chart kind of playing on that way too. Just because you have planets in the 8th house doesn't mean that you're doomed for death or anything like that. It's just maybe you're the kind of person who goes through a lot of transformations. And then we have the 9th house. 9th house is the house of higher ideals. It's your house of spirituality. It's your house of travel, like long distance travel. And when you see how the 9th house is, angled, kind of connected to the 3rd house, 3rd house is more like short distance travel, communication, in your little circle, whereas the 9th house is like higher ideals, long distance travel. You've gone into the world and you're forming your own spirituality and you're forming your own higher ideals and stuff like that. And it's commonly associated with the sign of Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a very spiritual sign. It's a very worldly sign. And then we have the 10th house. The 10th house is associated with Capricorn, and it's a career house. You're moving a lot into public persona when you get to the 10th and 11th houses. Whereas the 4th house is the deepest part of you, the 10th house is your most public self. Capricorn is a very hardworking sign. It's very work-driven. I don't know a Capricorn who feels substantial when their work life is off. So this is a very work-associated house, the 10th house. The 11th house is more associated with long-term pleasures, long-term goals. It's the house of friends and long-term wishes. It's really has to do a lot with like your goals. Like I feel like it's very associated with legacy as well, what you want to do in the long run. It's also opposite the 5th house, whereas the 5th house is more immediate pleasures, what sparks joy for you just like on a regular everyday, what really gets you going, when you think about like future and the life and like your long-term goals, like what is it that really gets you going and is pushing you every day to work harder. That is what is in your 11th house. 11th house is associated with the sign of Aquarius. How could I forget Aquarius? Aquarius is a very us associated sign. It's very like less focused on who I am and more what I am to the world, what I'm bringing to the world, what my place is in society. It's a sign that focuses more on the collective. The 12th house is the house most associated with the sign of Pisces. Pisces is a very mixed bag when you think about it. A lot of people like to say that Pisces is a combination of all 12 signs. It definitely has a lot of depth to it. The 12th house is the house of solitude, death again, like whereas the 8th house is pretty dark, and it's just kind of things in life that happen that you don't like, unexpected life things. I feel like the 12th house is more places you go alone. When you die, you go alone. prisons, mental institutions. It's called the House of Undoing, which when I first learned undoing, it was such a interest. I had to like look up so many definitions of what undoing is. It's just basically where we come undone. Also, the house of what you can't see. You know, when you die, you can't really see death. Things that are not tangible in a way is what is associated with the 12th house. It's such a elusive house in that sense, because like the other realms and, you know, all that stuff is associated with the 12th house. When you think of underwater, like what is underwater, there's so much that we don't know. When you connect that with the sign of Pisces, like kind of gives another definition to the 12th house. So interesting, actually. I want to say that my favorite house is, what should I say? I feel like I really like the 5th house and the 12th house. I like 12th house stuff because I like I don't know, deep mental stuff. Like I feel like my biggest transformations are like when I'm by myself. So there's a beauty, I guess, to undoing yourself. Finally, you know, we're getting into the meat and potatoes of this thing. Okay, I will see you guys next week. Bye.